Derek, thank you so much for your time. I've been following your work for so long. I'm ready to get faster, but I'm ready also to get schooled in so many ways.
Well, thanks for
Yeah,
having me, Rocco. I will say that I'm turning 53 this year, and I've gotten back into doing all the stuff that I recommend, like all the drills and all the runs and all that. And I'm actually getting way better. Like it's funny when you follow your own advice.
it's terrible. It's rare, actually, because you do what you preach, right? And I saw some of your videos and actually going back to the basics, as you always say, which is incredible because people think that as we age, we need to start uh, forgetting about speed and training. And I would love your take on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest, like when you get older, yes, things are tougher. You get sort of this like dad bod thing going on. You have to be careful with what you eat. You don't sleep as well, and you're sore most of the time. Like if I don't exercise, I get stiff and sore. If I exercise, I get stiff and sore. So,
There's no
you
way
know,
out.
yeah. So I've been trying to push the envelope, knowing what I know, and it's definitely better to have a planned, I'm going to say safe exercise program where everything's progressive and you do get better, and your risk, is relatively low. Like I'll still do jumps and plyometrics and sprints, obviously, but I'm very careful with, maybe bringing the intensity down or making sure that the hurdle I'm jumping over is shorter, or something, or I'm on a softer surface or whatever. But over, the years, trial and error has made me a little smarter about these things, but I do have to push it. You do have to push yourself.
There's another way you can find your biological capacity, if I say that. How you're going to optimize it, right?
Yes, yes, yeah. And I think as a society, we're always seeking comfort, right? We're always, trying to get to that place where like, well, I did all that stuff when I was young. I don't have to do it anymore. And then you'll notice your health just declines, right? So you do have to force that adaptation.
100%. And just to step back a bit, tell me more about you.
Um, I was more of a athletics, track and field athlete. I played multi sports as a kid. I was busy all the time, which is what you want, and what I'm trying to do with my children. But at some point I specialized, and when I went to university, I competed in track and field, mostly sprints and jumping events. So that's where I feel comfortable. I have coached some people over longer distances and had some success. I just don't get the same sort of pleasure out of that. That's a little different. It's a different speed, right? But I would say that track and field is where I draw a lot of my knowledge, and the mentors that I've had obviously have had a lot of influence in track and field and had success. So it's not a bad base or foundation to start from if you're working with other sports and other athletes. But that's where I started, and then eventually, the one thing you'll find with track and field, doesn't pay quite as much as some of these other sports, right? So people are saying like, well, why doesn't Tyreek Hill from the Chiefs go run in the Olympics? Well, the Olympics don't pay what the Kansas City Chiefs and the NFL pay. So there's a reason for that. And so I fully support, players who want to play in the Premier League, or, and make their money and capitalize off of that. So, but we can still make them faster.
Oh, 100%. And well, you've seen a lot of NFL players that you can see that 80 dash and you're like, Jesus Christ, what would they do if they weren't on track, right? But
Yeah, and they didn't have 240 pounds on them, right? So
imagine that.
yeah. So
Clearing
it's interesting, but I follow the money.
100%. I'll trace them down. Tell me, just clear those red herrings out there with the fundamentals of speed. How we can get stronger if it's universal, like what things are universal for every sport. Because, for example, I love power sports, and I always tell people when we do, for example, training for deadlifts for a competition or something, let's start increasing the patterns, clearing the movement, making it as good as it can get, and then let's work speed, and then everything goes really bad, and then we're taking weight away. Let's do it again. Let's do it faster, because speed can create a lot of strength.
Yes, yes. And one of the things that I focus on a lot is, from Charlie Francis, I do a short to long approach, which is starting with shorter distances and then slowly expanding the distance and the velocity. It just happens, right? So I spend a lot of time on starting position, the mechanics of starting, getting the arms and the upper body involved, head position. And we work on early acceleration a lot, especially with team sport, because that's the essence of their game, is short sprints. And I've been working with the Toronto Maple Leafs, and we do dryland sprinting for ice hockey too, because the initial 4 or 5 steps are sprinting steps.
Bring it home, Maple Leafs. Come on. It's been 100+ years.
This is the year. Yeah, this is the year. We'll see. But yeah, I would say I focus a lot on repetitive short sprints, like short 5 yards, 10 yards, 10 meters, because that's where I want to build capacity and expertise. And, we do some resisted work as well. Mm-hmm. I like it because it slows things down a bit and you can find your posture better and work on those mechanics. And the other thing is, and people will say stuff like, well, why are you starting that way in soccer? They're upright and they don't start that way. Well, the reason I do it optimally is I want to program the muscles to activate in starting in a certain way, the certain sequence, a certain angle. And then when people play, they will gravitate towards that position to get, the optimal acceleration. So if you keep working that through repetition and repetition 3 times per week, 300 yards of short sprints, like 30 reps of sprints per session, it's going to add up, and it's going to have a muscle memory around how you accelerate, the capacity you have to repeat that. So that's what I've been working on a lot with the athletes that I work with is, yes, we work on max velocity. Yes, we work on longer sprints, but we're always developing and building a staple of our foundation of short sprints that they can repeat all day long.
How would that change in a matter of volume and intensity? How would you actually create that strategy regarding, well, we're not going to talk about a 53-year-old. Let's say someone starting and wants to get fast. Let's say we're doing an assessment. Would like anatomy play a role? Would be something as a coach, as you see that, we would say, okay, you're not meant to be you're a Saint Bernard's and you're trying to be a greyhound, but you cannot be because your anatomy won't allow? Or is it something more?
Yeah, I think you're analyzing everybody on a case-by-case basis and going, okay, well, what are the things that we need to work on? And if you're working with somebody who's out of shape or somebody who's younger, you're going to try to develop basic strength, right? So, and that's where the drills come in, where you do all the drills upright. You can work on range of motion of limbs. You can work on postural strength and integrity. You can work on ground contact integrity, just with the upright drills. So when I'm working with somebody early, whether it's rehabilitation or performance, we spend a lot of time in the drills because it does build strength in those areas that I want it. And you get the repetition of modeling technique, right? And a lot of people will poo-poo drills and say they don't make people faster. And like, yes, they don't directly make them faster, but it creates a conversation and context for when they do run. When you say, okay, remember in the drill, we had your hand position here, you're looking here, you're, dorsiflexing the foot, in late swing before you hit the ground. And so it makes it easier for you to start cueing in actual sprinting scenarios once you've gone through all of this process of developing it in a drill context. So I think that's where I start. I assess people. Obviously, people say, well, how do you assess people? I say, well, I get them to warm up, do their warm up, and then I just watch them. Like, okay, do a couple of accelerations, right? And you'll see stuff. And after a while, you just keep seeing the same thing because you get the soccer player or you get the basketball player, and they're all training the same. So you see the same errors all the time in terms of overstriding or landing on their heel. It's pretty generic after a while, but certainly you have to, assess them doing what they normally do. And then you say, okay, here, I don't even say these are all the things that are bad. I just say, okay, great. Thanks for that. That's awesome. And then I bring them into my process. which is starting with upright drills and cueing them in ways that will impact ultimately their sprint performance.
So regarding the aspect of, you said I do the assessment, and then you've done the assessment, and now you have to actually see how many sessions you can add, because we need to add resistance training, correct, in order to actually increase our speed. Do you think that it's the same applies at training fast or training slow, the same thing with the weights, or it doesn't have to do, because we train adaptations, right? And if how would that impact the performance of a, like, say, track and field, or someone that wants to become faster?
Like, it's interesting because a lot of people think strength mean let's go in the weight room, but there's so many things you can do, in an outdoor setting, on the track or on a field. Like, I'll incorporate, like I said, resistance bands for the drills, because it simulates us either going up a hill, and you get more of an extension response out of the hip. We use medicine balls a lot for throws and doing our drills with the med ball overhead, and doing all types of throws. So I think I will, and I'm not a weight room guy. Like, my room here is full of weights. I have, like, 800 pounds of weights here. So I understand the value of weights, but from a logistical point of view, it's easier for me to address the fundamental strength issues in a track setting, or going through the drills, and it specifically addresses them, right? So it's the specific core strength required to hold sprint position. It's not just doing planking over on the side. So I like to exhaust that first, and then when they get to a certain point, okay, let's look at your weight training program. Yeah, then let's go in the gym. We're doing really well outside here. Let's add value by squatting or pulling something, or doing some sort of single leg exercise. And I think that's where a lot of people go wrong, is that they think, well, let's solve it in the gym first. It's like, no, we don't have to go there yet, right? But a lot of people feel very comfortable in a gym setting, and they don't feel as comfortable outside teaching movement. And so I'm trying to push people to do more stuff outside. And obviously during COVID, it was a lot easier.
Well, yeah, because you could be, yeah. I saw a lot of your videos actually outside, and it was incredible how inventive you were with specific videos.
And we just need a bit of sunscreen, and that's it. But I think we have to start looking at solutions that are kind of integrated with the movement we're going to carry out ultimately, right? So and that's not to say I don't still do Olympic lifting or heavy lifts and try to get my bench press up so my pecs look better, but I'm really trying to solve most of it in a running setting outdoors.
You said about fundamentals. Can we dissect that a bit?
Yeah. I think whenever I work with athletes, for whatever reason, they have similar errors, right? So a lot of people think if they tuck their head, and they'll end up curling their spine, right? And they think, okay, that keep your head down, and that's like drive phase. And you'll see that a lot, and it does affect their output abilities in terms of getting to extension, overstriding, and just something as simple as where they're looking can heavily impact their acceleration abilities, right? And how it sets them up. And also, this all goes back to injuries and injury prevention as well. So if you set up their posture, the fundamental posture right from the outset, and you say, this is how we do it, this is where I want you to look, it solves a lot of problems that you don't have to deal with later, right? And head position. So the two things I work on would be head position and firing the arms powerfully to the front side of the body. And if they do that, the body lines up and it straightens out. And, some people say, oh, they got poor core stability, so we got to work on that. That's why they're not in line. It's like, no. It's simple biomechanics. Yeah, it's simple biomechanics, right? So, you don't see cheetahs and thoroughbred horses doing planks and single leg squats on Bosu balls, right? So, there is a natural intuitive mechanic that we try to achieve through coaching, right? And if you get those fundamentals down, it is like riding a bicycle, right? You do retain it, because I think there's this path of least resistance to the best solution.
Yeah.
once you hardwire it, right? You know, people aren't going to invent shitty ways to move after that, after you've shown them, you know, the light. So I think, you know, addressing those things right away is so important from a fundamental point of view. And if it's a drill, if it's a certain cue, if you have to add resistance to get it, great, do what you have to do, but get that result as soon as possible so that the athlete knows, okay. And then as part of this whole thing, you know, we're using, like, you know, our phone to capture it and send it to them and say, like, this is what you look like. This is what are you feeling? Is it the same? Like, are you connecting with what I want you to do and visualizing it the same way? Because if you can capture that and they understand what they have to do, you won't have a problem with it ever again. So
You want efficiency, right? Especially in running, like
yeah, yeah,
as with everything. So
yeah, because that, again, if you hardwire that, then, you know, it just takes care of itself, right? Like, I'll work with NFL players who are good athletes, or good NFL athletes, right? And then when you talk to them about running and how they learn, like, well, nobody really taught me, I was just fast. Right there, you're like, okay, that's good. Like, you're talented, but they are lacking the efficiency that you're talking about. So could they be even better? Could they be more resilient because they're moving more efficiently? You know, and some of them are just happy to be in the NFL and making lots of money. Others want to get better. Like, you know, the Tom Brady example is somebody who wanted to get better every year and find better ways to do things,
what a
right?
career,
So
huh?
yeah, yeah, and you know, he had a few injuries, but he didn't miss many games. Somebody fell into his leg, so, and they created a rule around that. So I think, you know, we have to start looking at these people who are, you know, obviously successful and have longevity, and go, okay, what are they doing that's making them, you know, some of the top performers? And it is going to be the fundamental stuff you're talking about.
That's incredible, because I think that my next question would be how we can incorporate speed into fitness. Because
Like, just general population fitness.
yes, because it's you said about the gym, and you said before that, you know, people feel more comfortable in that kind of environment. But I think we need to bring that into general pop, because a lot of coaches send me, when I told them, you know, I'm going to have our podcast, everybody was like, how can we incorporate speed into fitness?
Again, going back to a lot of those drills are a very good way. I worked in a physical therapy clinic for the last 5 years, and I would gravitate to what I was good at, which was teaching drills, speed drills, to people who had, you know, knee rehab cases, ACLs, people who had back pain, people who had shoulder injuries, a couple of brain injury patients, right? And we use speed drills to help build back, you know, neuroplasticity and just get them moving and get their brains firing, right? So a lot of the other physical therapists who had people on tables and were working on them in their way were kind of looking at me like, what the hell are you doing, right? Like, that's weird. That's foreign to us. So certainly there's a void in general population rehab and fitness that doesn't incorporate this stuff, because one, they don't know, right? And so if you don't know anything about it, then you're going to stay away from it, and you're probably going to think it's dangerous. But as soon as you know how to, you know, incorporate this stuff progressively with general population, then it becomes a lot easier to get buy-in. And people, when they start running fast, like even at my age, when I do a full out sprint, I'll think, wow, I'm really moving. That feels good. It feels, you know, liberating to run. And then of course I see the video and I look like an old guy running. But in my head, I think I'm like, you know, pretty fast. So, or I'll run against my 17-year-old son. And I said, it feels like when he takes off and he, you know, goes ahead of me, it feels like somebody's pulling me backwards, like with a tractor beam or something. But you know, I'm still running better than most 53-year-olds.
I
So
bet.
but yeah, I think, you know, if you don't do it, then, you know, and you start with the drills and build them up, build up their strength, and then you get them to doing short accelerations, right? 5 or 6 steps. Like, we do this exercise, like it's 10 meters times 10. We just go back and forth with 10-meter accelerations. It's 6 or 7 strides. And it's very hard to get hurt doing short accelerations. Usually when people pull a hamstring, it's a little further out. But I found there's a certain level or deficit of ability to run. Like I've worked with actors and they'll have a running scene and I'm just like, oh my goodness, that's horrible, right? But
My
then you
eyes
think
hurt.
about it, you think, well, I'm going to make him an efficient runner, but then it might ruin the scene because most people are pretty horrible at running. So, you want to make it look accurate. And then when I was working at the physical therapy clinic, the amount of people who came in and said, I avulsed my, patellar tendon or something like that. And, oh, how'd you do it? Oh, I was running for the bus, or I was running after my dog or my children. So basic activities that they couldn't carry out safely because they got away from running and sprinting. Right. And
Yeah.
there's going to be a time when you might have to run away from something or run to something. And guess what? You're not prepared.
And that would be a good segue for my next question, actually. What's the most common, because that's how we started, what's the most common injury that you actually face in speed training?
It probably would be a hamstring, I would say, especially for the ill prepared, because you get that rapid stretch, especially when you come through the swing phase into late swing phase before you hit the ground, and people will tend to overstride, stretches the hamstring really quickly, and then it has to shorten quickly to contract when you hit the ground, and that's when the injury occurs. So, the cure is going to be doing the activity properly and progressively, right? So teaching them good mechanics. But I would say hamstrings is probably the first one that I would be concerned about. Other than that, there's some people who are ill prepared will have calf injuries, a lot of little calf strains, maybe related to Achilles tendonitis or foot or something like that. So lower leg. So that's why the drills are really good to progressively, like in the upright position, work on ground contact integrity and build elasticity. So that's why, as soon as you start sprinting like this, you put a lot of stress on that calf and Achilles. So you want to make sure you start upright. And then other sprinting related injuries, like you mentioned, sometimes it could be quad or hip flexor. And a lot of that may happen. Yeah, because people push too hard backside and then it stretches the quad and hip flexor when they try to pull the knee through. So those are probably the three things that I'm most concerned about. Less so in ice hockey, there's a lot of adductor strains, but I think for the most part, I solve all of these things with teaching proper running, right? If somebody pulls a hamstring, first thing we do is, well, let's teach you how to run properly now, right? And that's how I had success with athletes, pro collegiate athletes, was they might not have listened to me before, but once they got injured and we solved it by teaching them how to run, it was one-on-one. I teach you how to run properly now. Now you got their attention. Then it worked out really well, and they saw the light after that.
It's really interesting saying about stride, because no one actually does that. And when I told you that I had to consult that kind of, I cannot say the team, but they had like 6 Premier League. They had like 6 hamstring tears.
Yes.
And I was like, it's like 1 is an accident, maybe 2. After that, there's correlation means causation sometimes. And he was mostly that quad dominant because they run. So we don't have to train the hamstrings, and it's all about training the quads. And that actually was a lot of volume on the quads, a lot of kicking, which I expect the opposite, but there was no hamstring, there was nothing. So any test you do to prevent, as people like to hear, I usually say the thorough assessment, because yes, it depends on the person, but what's your take?
I will again fall back to my expertise, which is, okay, let's get them to do a running test, whether it's like a 30-meter sprint, and let's evaluate them more so subjectively in terms of like what they look like, and video them, see where they're contacting the ground, see their hip position relative to the ground. Are they compressing too much when they hit the ground? Is there a lot of knee flexion on ground contact? Are they landing too far in front of their center of mass? Are they pushing back too far behind their bodies as well? And that's going to be the biggest indicator for me, is like, how do they look when they're running? How is their upper body? Is their upper body contributing, or is it tight? Is it constraining things? And that'll be my biggest assessment. And I found that you can do strength tests, and then there's obviously a lot of Nordic hamstring and Nordboard and this and that. But just from my experience, it hasn't been indicative or predictive of anything. Like, we've had people who are very strong at doing all those exercises, those eccentric exercises, and they still pull their hamstring because it's at a much higher velocity,
Yeah.
and the mechanics are different. So, I go to the source. If they're hurting themselves when they run, maybe there's something wrong with their running, right? If they hurt themselves doing a Nordic hamstring curl, well, let's look at how they're doing the Nordic hamstring curl. But you're not trying to mix and match things and predict things with a very different exercise. So I'm not saying don't do that, but just make sure you have a very comprehensive process around all of this stuff, and you have different sources, different tests to pull from, and you get a big picture 360 look at everything. And I think a lot of people just focus like, nope, we're just going to look at GPS and see if they're what their load is, right? And it's like, oh geez, like, and the GPS companies just tell me how many times they're in a high velocity zone, what's their max velocity, and then I compare that against what they've trained in. So if somebody is running at 20 miles per hour, but we train at 24 miles per hour, I don't have a concern. But if somebody's running 20 miles per hour and they usually train and practice at 18 miles per hour, 16, then I have a concern, right? We don't have a buffer or a speed reserve. So, stuff like that, I think is overlooked.
It's really funny that you actually said about, we're checking GPS and we're checking all the data, the gadgets, because we forgot that this actually observes and this analyzes, and we actually should turn them off. And we're becoming more of I saw this on the camera, I saw that. What's your opinion? Yes, they're a tool in a toolbox, but it don't make the toolbox.
Yeah, like when I go and train my athletes, I will collect a lot of video. And so that means now I'm occupied. I should, if I was rich, I would just pay somebody to come shoot the video for me, and I would just coach, but I'm not. So
start playing in NFL.
Yeah. So now I have to balance off, like, I want to collect the data, the video, but I want to observe the athlete in person, because there's all these different things that you can see in person that you can't necessarily capture with the video. And some of it will be, you can in real time look at, how much tension they have in their system. And the other thing you could do is you could listen a little more at their ground contacts and what the quality is. Is it slapping, or is it crisp and light and quick, right? So those are all things that you have to kind of free up your senses for. And if you're filming, it's very tough to do all of that, right? So I have to, like I said, maybe one rep I'll film, the next rep I'll just watch. And I want to make sure I capture everything. And but it's very tough to do. I've been doing this now for over 30 years, and I still feel like I could be better at this or that, or how I run the session, or the jokes that I crack during the session, right? I got to improve all of these things. But I think that's just how you have to operate. Like, there's always something better that you can do.
100%. And that's true coaching. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Trying to find that kind of perfection and in the art. If you want to clear some misconceptions about speed training, which would they be?
I think there was a lot of debate over, like, do you have to run max velocity or max 100% to get better? And you do on occasion, right? I think you have to pick your spots. And so with speed training, I'm really happy with sometimes just saying, we're going to run everything at 95 or 90%. I want you to run it a little easier and focus on relaxation and technical execution. And then let's accumulate a lot of volume at that intensity where I know that we've solidified some technical issues. And then, okay, in track and field, it's easy because you put somebody into a race, a competition, which is going to be 100% effort, right?
Yeah.
Practice, it's never quite the same. And so you have, when you're a track coach, you have to schedule track meets and put them in certain events, and hopefully you have good weather and all that. If you're a strength and conditioning coach and you're working with the team, you have to set up scenarios where, okay, today's the day where we're going to try to run fast and get some intensity. But that's certainly not every session, because as soon as you put them, say you take football players, soccer players, and you put them into a competitive sprinting situation, you will see technique go out the window a lot of time, right? So then you say something like, okay, let's everybody agree we're going to go at 90%. You're going to focus on yourself and whatever, right? So you have to kind of lay up and take that lesser intensity to work on technical goals. And then throw it back to them. Okay, now we're going to race, and you're like, oh, look, everybody held their technique together. Great. Let's get away from that for a couple sessions, then we'll come back to it, right? And be explicit and transparent with the athletes around that, and just say, look, this is what we're doing. I want you to relax. I want you, because guess what? If they hit 22 miles per hour in training relaxed, we know that on the field in the game, they won't go that fast because there's other things going on. So now you've again worked on a very optimal technique with relaxation, and they're running faster than they need to run in the game. Great, that's a win.
That's what you want.
We know they're going to be fine when it comes to competition, right? So it's when you don't do that, and when you let a lot of these errors come in and they're straining, and it's only going to create bad habits that will haunt them when they get back to competition.
And it's hard to clear those out.
It's impossible. It's like trying to, I remember teaching kids how to do power cleans, and they want to put more weight on. It's like, I need more weight. And their technique can't be improved with heavy weight. It just can't. Like, they will just gravitate towards, emotional solutions, right? Where you lighten up the weight. Okay, let's work on, posture or whatever. Right. So you learn the hard way.
Oh yeah, and that's what we said before. Like I love that when I teach a deadlift, and you just say, okay, it's 60 kilos. Let's say you can do 180, and then let's add some speed. And you see on the video is like, this is not a deadlift. Just because it's lighter, you treat it like it's 180 or 200 or 300 or whatever that is. But it's hard, and if bad habit is in, it takes a while to actually clear that.
Yeah, so you're always better to underestimate and solidify some good technique, and then live to fight another day, right?
100%.
But there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of impatience in the industry, and if we do things right and we repeat it over the next 6 months, we're going to be very, very good in 6 months. But if we try to get everything solved right now, it's just going to be a mess.
I was chatting to Andy Bolton. He's the first guy actually he deadlifted 1,000 pounds, and he turns around and was like, success is boring. Put the work in and out, same thing. Try to be as crisp as you can, and you will get there. If you want it tomorrow, it's not going to happen. Yeah,
you have to. You almost have to put your brain somewhere else, right? And you just have to go through it. And, and it's kind of the same with rehab too, right? Like, I had some issues with my knee, and I wasn't patient, and I didn't follow my own advice. And then over time, I started to follow my own advice and just put in the work daily. And then it resolved itself, right? But I just lack that patience. And it's always something that we need to work on.
100%. And us as well, because it's exactly what we say, right? Regarding shoes, turf, material overall, what's your take? So let's say natural with turf, barefoot and non-barefoot, arch supports and stuff like that. So let's start about turf and all that. Is that something you think there's a difference or not, or we go back to technique?
Yeah, I think it's it's like anything. It's important to have exposures to multiple different scenarios, right? So if you're starting out, like we used to do a lot of our plyometrics on grass, and We would do it in pretty light duty shoes and try to strengthen our feet. We even did some stuff in sand, some jumps in place on sand, to strengthen the feet. And we did it bare feet as track athletes. And then we just made that progression to harder surfaces. Once the strength was in place, then you can start working at higher velocities and building elastic qualities, right? And that always seemed to be part of it. There's that periodization of surfaces and shoes that I highlight in all of my my courses, my running mechanics courses. And I say this is a consideration. And I was in New York City in October, and I was asked, and there's mostly physical therapists at my course, and I said, how many of you guys have ever considered the surface you're working on and the shoes that you're using and all that? And a lot of them said, I never, like, we just did the drills on whatever surface was in the clinic, right? So I said, okay, well, you can start on the softer surface and go slower and barefoot, and then eventually let's start working on the stiffer surfaces. Because if a lot of facilities that I do my courses in, they just have turf. Like, that's the thing. Like, let's get the green turf in there. It looks like grass, so, but there's no hard surfaces to work on because they're afraid of, I don't know, hard surfaces. So in one course, we had an athlete who was had a hamstring strain 3 days previously as a basketball player. And so we're doing the drills on the turf and it just looks sloppy, right? And he's African-American, and we moved him onto a stiffer surface, and then he just started looking better. Like, he was elastic, and we were forcing him to be elastic. And by the end of the session, his hamstring pain was gone because we made him more elastic, right? When somebody was just doing conditioning runs with him before and slogging through it, and his body was not responding because he's elastic. He's not, he's not plowing fields. So I think sometimes you have to, factor in what surface they're on and make sure that they're behaving the way they should. If they're elastic, they should be elastic. If you want them to be stronger, then obviously a softer surfaces might work, or work on proprioception. Yes, the ankle sprains, put them on a softer, more compliant surface and strengthen that ankle, right? So I think that's huge in everything that I think about in terms of the surfaces that we work on. Like, we're going to go to the track later today, and all my football players are going to be in track spikes on a track surface, because the rest of the year they're on turf, right? And it's more compliant, and I want them to be responsive.
How important is that? Because everything plays a role, and especially minor details, which are actually created, which they're not minor details, because as you said, now that patient, that athlete was in pain, and look what happened just by changing the surface, not the training, just the surface.
Yes. So, and that just comes with experience, right? If you go through and you observe different scenarios and different athletes, you start to get thinking, okay, I think the worst thing that can happen is people don't get results, or they don't improve, and they just kind of keep doing the same thing over and over again. Come on, like, let's improve it. But you got to change things up, and you've got to look at alternative solutions.
Always say, don't change something if it works, just change if it doesn't. It's,
yeah,
as easy as that.
And if it's working and you think I got to change something, it's just one variable that you can adjust a little bit and just see how it changes everything. But then, it's like, I want to improve my performance, so I'm going to take 5 supplements at once. Okay, well, which one's working? Yeah. I don't know, right? They're all working, right? So
yeah, the more
crazy.
You spread it, you have no idea what's going on.
No.
And you need to be specific, especially when you want a specific outcome. You need specific data and specific variables.
Yeah. I mean, the scientific method does actually work, right? So and obviously now today, in today's environment, like, everybody's poo-pooing science and this and just coming up with opinion. Is like, no, let's come back to common sense, right? And that's what I try to make sure it drives everything that I do, is like, there's a cause and effect of everything we do. So just be aware.
From the era of Charles Francis up till now regarding speed, do you think anything has actually changed, or we're just sugarcoating it?
I think there's got to be, the thing that I learned from him is you have to have certain things in place, and then everything else is kind of peripheral to it. It sort of doesn't matter, right? So if you want to get faster, you have to run, you have to run, you have to sprint, and you have to sprint a certain distance or a certain segment, and the volume has to be at a certain level. So that has to be in place. Now, some people might do more plyometrics to support that. Some people might do more weightlifting to support that. And it may depend on body type or limb length or muscle fiber type, or climate. Like maybe if you're in a colder climate, you got to be indoors more. So maybe you're opting to do more strength training and plyometrics than longer sprints. And so I think certain ingredients and volumes have to be in place. And then, whether or not somebody is doing yoga, or it's all just window dressing, in my opinion. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not saying it's good. I'm saying, okay, does the person like it? Do you feel better when you do it? Okay, great. We've got our sort of peripheral placebo things that surround this basic training. And you'll see that in pro sports a lot, where, personal trainers just get the athletes to do what they think is cool or what they like, but they're missing those basic ingredients, right? And that's the big thing I see in the NFL is like, yeah, somebody comes in the NFL and they're like dynamic and great and fast, and then they get away from what they did in college or high school, which would probably be the basic fundamental stuff. And now they're going to the beach to do agility drills and, TikTok videos. And
really helpful.
They get injured. Yeah. They get injured, they get slow, and people wonder what happened, right? Oh, he's just getting older. It's like, no. He got away from the stuff that really mattered. I'm not, and you can still do all that other fun stuff, but make sure you have a core sort of group of exercises that you constantly do to maintain those qualities.
So if you had to bullet point them, what would be the fundamentals for, let's say, the keys for mastery in speed training?
It's going to be covering off your acceleration basics, your acceleration, and the technique around acceleration and transitioning to max velocity. Then it's going to be ground contact quality. So the sprinting has to be part of that, but also like your plyometrics and just building that lower leg integrity and stiffness. So the stiffness is really important. And then basic strength. So yes, do stuff in the weight room. Do you want to squat? You want to pull from the floor? Does it matter? I don't know. Like, we used to keep it pretty simple, like pull something, press something, and squat something or whatever, right? So you pull from the floor, you bench press, and then you squat. Do you need to do all these single arm, single leg? I don't know. I'm still not convinced. Because if I'm doing the bounding and I'm doing the sprinting and I'm doing the stuff outdoors, I am covering off single leg requirements, right? To
multi-planner as well.
Sorry,
multi-planner.
Yes, obviously, like you're doing the multi-directional stuff, and that's a little further along the continuum. But certainly, you're doing the multi-directional stuff, the eccentric stuff, the deceleration, right? As we're seeing from,
because there were schools in the past that were saying, "I'm running this way. What do I have to do stuff in different directions?"
Yeah. I mean, if you're just a track athlete, just go straight ahead, obviously. But if you're changing direction, certainly, right? Now where it gets interesting is like how much of that is done in sport practice versus like strength and conditioning. And so there has to be some sort of balance there. And I always kept my strength and conditioning stuff pretty basic and fundamental. And I didn't try to duplicate the sport too much because I knew they would go to practice and they would do that. So you want to have like almost what I call like a bridging concept of, let's make sure that they can handle the lateral force requirements and the eccentric requirements. So when they go do their sport specific stuff, they're protected and they're better. Now, do I have them, sprint with a hockey stick or, hold a football every run? Or no, I don't do that. But certainly we know what multi-directional components we have to cover. And then there's a speed component, and then there's a work capacity component, right? So we'll do a lot of shuttles to just build work capacity around that, like even in an aerobic sense. So I think, yeah, you certainly have to have all of those things figured out: linear, speed, and acceleration, power, and eccentric control, strength, multi-directional. And then obviously your aerobic energy system has to be very, very good as well for any sport. I don't care who, what you're talking about. You can't be so ultra specific that you ignore those things.
Exactly. You said about seminars, and I need to know more about what the workshops you actually do, where people can find you, and if we can have you in Europe soon.
Yeah, well, I started them off the running mechanics professional. So if you go to runningmechanics.com, you'll see the courses that I offer. And I'm working on a periodization and planning course right now, but I have a sort of the running mechanics fundamental course, the level 1 course, and I have a running mechanics level 2, which is I call it level 2 med, but it is more of a rehabilitation and return to play course around running, and you know, we cover hamstring and ACL and
Sounds really interesting.
yeah, so those have been very successful in person. Obviously, I haven't done as many of them in the last few years, but I'm hopefully going to get back into the in-person a little more. But I have converted those 2 courses to virtual, and I'll have a planning course hopefully done in the next few months. And I think I kind of like the virtual because it allows me to pack in 12 hours of content into a course that people can kind of watch at their own pace. Whereas if I go and I do a weekend, it's very dense in terms of the amount of information, and then, you know, give people notes, but a lot of people will forget it because it's just so intense for those 2 days. So now I've kind of hybridized things too. So people come to the in-person course, and then if they want to buy the virtual one, I'll give it to them for like dirt cheap because they've already paid for the full course. And now they have it for the rest of their life, or until, you know, my platform still exists, but they can review it at any time and go through. And so I like the idea of having this sort of hybrid in-person digital virtual course platform. I just think it gives people much more, you know, value, I guess. So hopefully I can get out to meet you,
Looking
and we
forward to
can
that.
do an in-person course or a weekend of in-person courses.
Yeah, I
And
would love that. I
yeah.
really like how you actually keep everything BS free. You keep things simple, and it's really important that you keeping. I love when you say always about posture and how that plays a role, especially because a lot of people say posture doesn't play a role, and I see it a lot in rehab or with my patients that, you know, or athletes that said, oh, you know, it doesn't matter, and I was like, that's really weird, and I love exactly that you always say that, especially everything plays a role. And I'm so looking forward to having you for a workshop and actually learning from you.
Yeah, and it you know, and I hope that, you know, when you see the information, it just makes sense. Like that's what I want it to do. It's like, you know, oh, if this is the problem, this is how we fix it. This is the language we use. And you know, for the most part, everybody that's taken the course has had very good success in, you know, like if we do Saturday, Sunday, some people will go and train people on Monday and say like, yeah, it worked. It worked for my 9-year-old client. It worked for my pro athlete, and it worked for my 70-year-old recreational whatever triathlete. So I think that's the kind of reach that I'm looking for.
Back to basics.
Yeah, it's so the world is so complicated, and I'm trying to I'm protesting against that.
100%. Derek, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me, Rocco.
It's a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in vivo soon.
Yes, let's please keep in touch, and I hope to see you as well.
For sure. Thank you so much.
Take care.